What is your stance on illegal immigration?
The people who are classified as dreamers should be given amnesty, and Congress should have passed the appropriate legislation to recognize them, first of all, as legal in the United States and as eligible for citizenship. For other illegal immigrants currently in the United States, the U.S. should adopt an updated version of the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act, which was the last general amnesty for illegal immigrants currently in the United States who can prove they've been in the United States for at least 5 consecutive years. And third thing is, we should do certain things about border security, but not build a wall. We should essentially fund a greater number of Border Patrol officers for the southern border, also increased electronic surveillance, and where appropriate, build additional fencing, which would probably amount to maybe 200 miles or so of additional fencing along the border, beyond what currently exists.
Do you think that media has portrayed immigrants in a certain way, whether it be like good or bad? Are they leaning towards one side?
The press has always portrayed immigrants in a certain way. This was true of immigrants arriving in the first half of the 19th century. And immigrants were always portrayed based on the particular set of beliefs of newspaper editors of the time period. Today, we throw in reporters. So, does the press portray immigrants objectively? I would say more so in the last 25 years than historically. Because historically, the press, unless it was immigrant press, because remember, we used to have 1,000 foreign language newspapers in this country in the early 20th century. And all of the 1,000 foreign language newspapers represented a variety of immigrant groups in the U.S. And obviously they were friendly to immigrants. So if you're talking about the foreign language press, that's always been friendly to immigrants in varying degrees. The English language press, that is the American press, has varied. And essentially in the 19th century, certainly in the first half, there was considerable hostility towards immigrants and the press. And in the second half to the early 20th century, if it was dependent on where and whether the immigrant groups were likely to vote Democratic or Republican. What I mean is, if it was in the Midwest, and we're talking about immigrants from Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Germany, then the press is going to be friendly towards immigrants. If we're talking about Italian Catholics, the answer is no. And the Northeast, again, it depended on what part of the Northeast as to whether or not they would be friendly or hostile towards immigrants. Since in the late 19th and early 20th century, there were very few newspapers that were not either Democratic or Republican in editorial viewpoint, and that's skewed how they viewed immigrants. Democratic newspapers in New York would generally be pro-immigrant. Republican newspapers, again, depending on whether the particular immigrant group, in the view of political leaders in the Republican Party, could be potentially Republican voters or not, as to whether they'd be pro-immigrant or not. Generally in New York City, the Republicans would be anti-immigrant Republican newspapers. And of course, the radical newspaper, the socialist press, generally was pro-immigrant because the immigrants made up a number of their locals. The socialists got very strong support from Germans, from Jews, Italians, Finns, and some unionized British immigrants. So they could depend on support from those immigrant groups. So they tended to be pro pro-immigrant. So again, it depended on political view, where in the country.